The liberal approach of coddling criminals didn't work, and it never will. Nothing in our Constitution gives dangerous criminals a right to prey on innocent, law-abiding citizens. Ronald Reagan. Every society gets the kind of criminal it deserves. What is equally true is that every community gets the kind of law enforcement it deserves. Robert F. Kennedy. First, I want to briefly review some of the out-of-control crime, particularly violent crime, in this country that has been skyrocketing in the past few months. As of July 11, 2020 in Milwaukee, homicides are up 37% so far this year. In Philadelphia, as of July 12th, police have recorded 946 people shot so far in 2020, a 31% increase compared to the same time last year. To date, the city has recorded 224 people murdered, a 26% increase compared to the same period last year. The homicides in Chicago have gone up by 51% compared to last year, Kansas City 34%, and Albuquerque 12%. Chicago had 90 murders in June. Also in June, the shootings in New York have doubled compared to the same time last year. Over the Father's Day weekend in June, 104 people were shot and 14 killed, including 5 children. The youngest victim, McKay James, was only 3 years old. He was shot while in a car with his father. It was believed that his father was the intended target. As of July 22, 2020, 2,150 people have been shot in Chicago since January. In June 2019, there were 89 shootings in New York City. In June 2020, there were 205. That's a 130% increase. At least 6 young children were murdered over the 4th of July weekend. And during that same weekend, a man walking with a 6-year-old daughter in the Bronx was shot in broad daylight in a drive-by shooting. On July 12th, a 1-year-old baby was shot and killed at a cookout in New York City. Look at what is happening in Portland right now. Anarchists have been completely destroying the city for the past 2 months. Now, if you go to the DHS website, they have actually cataloged all this violence that has been occurring and all the destruction. Just Google Acting Secretary Wolf condemns the rampant, long-lasting violence in Portland. Now, the feds are being blamed for their tactics. You know, you're hearing this stuff about them dressing up in plain clothes and abducting protesters while they're driving around in a van. But you have to remember something. The federal agents, when they go undercover, like for example, in the mob, when they infiltrate the mob, they're not wearing their uniforms. Obviously, they're wearing plain clothes. Sometimes they need to be incognito to achieve certain missions. And in this case, you see Portland's engulfed in riots, and people are specifically targeting the police officers and federal agents. They're committing a lot of acts of violence against them. So in order for them to do their job safely, they do need to be in plain clothes, and they are taking dangerous, violent people off the street. Yes, are some peaceful protesters maybe getting mixed up in that? Maybe. Sometimes the feds can pull people who haven't done anything wrong, but that's why it's probably not a good idea to roll with a violent mob of anarchists anyway, because nothing good is going to come of that. And you've seen the videos of what's going on in Portland. It just looks like complete chaos there. These anarchists, they firebombed the Hatfield U.S. courthouse. And, you know, what's despicable is they even attacked construction crews when they were going to make repairs on the courthouse. Federal agents had to actually intervene and stand between the anarchists and the construction crew to protect them. Now, the federal agents have been getting injured and maimed by these anarchists. You know, these anarchists have actually been shining lasers, you know, which is, I believe, such a cowardly act. Like standing back and shining these high-powered lasers, which, I mean, some of these can actually start fires. That's how powerful they are. They're shining them in the agents' eyes, and 3 of them have actually been blinded. They may be permanently blind. You know, some of these anarchists have been shining the lasers at airplanes, too. And, you know, that's dangerous because that can actually cause, you know, pilots to not be able to see and crash the plane. And, you know, one agent got hit in the head with a hammer. These anarchists have been using slingshots, rocks, bottles, fireworks. They've been launching mortar-grade fireworks into buildings. They tried multiple times to burn the courthouse down, and they're firebombing buildings with people inside of them. Yet, the Democrats claim that the feds are the ones instigating the peaceful protesters to commit violence. And, you know, the fact that people are actually blaming the feds for this, it kind of just shows you how corrupt people's hearts have become. The violence was happening in Portland long before the feds got there, and they certainly didn't instigate it. They're just trying to protect federal property, and they're doing their job. You know, the federal statutes tell them that they shall protect federal property, not they may, they shall. They're just doing their job. Now, Portland officials, they're actually demanding that the feds take down the fence, the protective fence surrounding the courthouse, and that's basically the last line of protection. So, I mean, that's just complete insanity. Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, she told Ted Wheeler to give her complete control over the Portland Police Department. Now, Wheeler has already effectively neutered the police. He's neutralized them and prevented the cops from acting. But that's not good enough for her. I mean, she thinks that Wheeler hasn't gone far enough, so she wants the cops doing absolutely nothing. Even less than they're doing now, which is actually pretty hard to believe. Now, I want to talk about what's going on in New York. I saw a story about the NYPD officers, including the chief of police himself. They got assaulted on the Brooklyn Bridge. The officers and the chief were bleeding from their heads. This all started because they were peacefully marching with the clergy across the Brooklyn Bridge to stand against all the violence plaguing New York City. And the fact that they were actually attacked by these anarchists just for peacefully marching, it just shows you who these people really are. One of the perpetrators, Karan Campbell, assaulted 3 cops, one of whom lost consciousness. And a prosecutor requested $75,000 bail, and the judge refused. So this guy who assaulted 3 cops was actually released on bail. But think about that, though. I mean, this guy assaulted 3 cops, including the chief of police. The chief of police was one of the people assaulted, and he was let out on bail. So this is why I and so many others have been warning people about bail reform from the beginning. 5 months before the pandemic, Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance, along with these other DAs, they published a piece about how bail reform didn't go far enough. He said that they actually need to do away with bail for all offenses. All offenses. Think about that. Murder, rape, aggravated assault. But you have to understand that the left was never about actual reform. If they were, they would have replaced cash bail with a fair actuarial risk-based system, whereby people were evaluated based on their criminal history and other risk factors. But they didn't do that. The left's goal with bail reform and other criminal justice reform efforts was to let dangerous offenders out of jail so they could terrorize society, point blank. Now, if the assailant of the chief of the New York Police Department was released on bail, what do you think is happening to all these offenders who assault or maim the average citizen? And in addition to bail reform, we have these DAs who are not charging offenders for crimes, who are undercharging and seeking lenient sentences for these serious offenses. Remember, it was some point in the past 2 years, Larry Krasner, his office, they gave a guy 3 years. They prosecuted a guy, gave him 3 years for going to a convenience store and shooting a clerk with an AK-47, severely injuring him. And he only got 3 years in prison because of a plea deal. We have sentencing reform, probation reform, parole reform, which limit the ability of the state to hold dangerous offenders accountable, send them back to prison, and keep them in prison where they belong. Look at all of these efforts to handcuff and neutralize the police. Manhattan DA Vance sent an internal memo to his staff to go easy on the protesters and the rioters, but they wanted more investigations into police misconduct. They planned to data mine and look into the cops as much as possible. So, and it shows you where their priorities are. Don't go after the anarchists, the people causing destruction. Go after the cops. Now, I'm sure you've heard about this. New York City disbanded their anti-crime unit. It was a group of plainclothes police officers who basically, their focus was getting guns off the street. They could go out in the community, people didn't know who they were, so they were able to proactively fight crime. They were a huge weapon against gang violence as well. Now, look what's happening. The murder and shooting rate is surging in New York City. People in the community, even the activists, are saying that this is gang violence. It's a result of the gang members feeling emboldened to settle their beefs now that the anti-crime unit's gone. If they don't see anyone in uniform, they know it's a cop, so they'll feel free to just do what they want to do. On top of this, we have New York City releasing several prisoners from Rikers Island because of COVID-19 concerns, so that has something to do with it. Another thing, too, is this whole thing with qualified immunity. The Colorado governor actually ended qualified immunity for cops. I thought to myself as soon as I heard this, who would ever want to become a cop now in Colorado? And if they try this in other states, no one will want to be a cop. Republican Senator Mike Braun has actually introduced legislation to make it easier for people to sue police officers. He wants to end qualified immunity too. You see, for those of you who aren't familiar with what it is, police officers currently benefit from qualified immunity. It protects them when they accidentally violate people's civil rights. This unfortunately does happen when the police have to make split-second decisions to make an arrest, search, or protect themselves or others. Sometimes the cops do things that are later found to be unjust in court, but the cops are not sued. They can be disciplined internally, but they're not sued for making honest mistakes. However, Republican Senator Mike Ron's trying to end qualified immunity, and this is a terrible idea. This will allow people to sue the police and take everything they have. So, if police can now be sued for honest mistakes, who would ever want to become a police officer? Even Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Samuel Alito, two justices on completely ends of the spectrum, have agreed that qualified immunity is necessary. A federal judge actually just blocked an attempt by Seattle City Council to strip police officers of crowd control tools such as pepper spray. The fact that Seattle tried to do this is very telling. Virginia is trying to pass a bill that would make assault on a police officer a misdemeanor instead of a felony. Think about that. It kind of just shows you how they feel about cops and their well-being. Cops will also have to issue warnings before using their guns. That's another bill that's being proposed. This will embolden criminals to attack cops. They know they'll only get a misdemeanor. And on top of that, they know that they'll get bail and the DA will probably not charge them depending on what jurisdiction they're in. And obviously this is having an effect. I'm sure you've heard of the Ferguson effect before. We're seeing a repeat of that, but on steroids. The cops are not only backing off proactive policing, but they're actually leaving in droves. Between May 25th and July 3rd, 3,503 New York City police officers filed for retirement, compared with just 287 in the same period in 2019. People who know me know that I've been working in the criminal justice system since 2016. And I've been fortunate enough to work the streets in the executive level and in the management level. And thus, I've had a front row seat to this craziness. And it's sad to say it, but I've seen this. I knew that this was all coming. And I've been vocal about it to as many people as possible in real life and on social media. I've made several tweets and Facebook posts about this kind of stuff. And I'm not alone. Many other people have who also work in the criminal justice system saw the writing on the walls. I wrote the following back in 2018. People who know me know that I keep a journal and I write a lot of stuff down, stuff that's going on in my life, my own observations. So I just want to read it to you because it still holds true today. We do not have a criminal justice system in this country. We have a perverted system of justice in this country, one in which the victims of crime often get no justice and the perpetrators are seldom held accountable. I truly believe that most people have no idea of what is coming. There's an old saying, the inmates are running the asylum. Well, now it has actually happened. The progressives, for quite some time now, have been giving more and more rights to criminals. They have more rights while in the community, they have more rights when they interact with the police, and they have more rights in the courtroom, and they even have more rights in prison. In many cases, they have more rights than you and me. Simultaneously, criminals are not being held accountable for their crimes. And even when they are held accountable, they are given slaps on the wrist, light sanctions, lenient sentences, or no sentences at all. Meanwhile, the police are under constant scrutiny and attack. Their actions are under the microscope, and laws and policies have been passed to limit their ability to subdue criminals, to prevent crimes from happening, and to solve crimes after they have been committed. And to top it off, there is a growing movement to disarm law-abiding citizens so that we cannot protect ourselves from these criminals. On October 1st, 2018, during a rally in Tennessee, President Trump bluntly referred to the Democrat Party as the party of crime. When I heard that, I just said, wow, that if ever there was a more accurate statement. Now, I'm here to tell you that what we are witnessing is the greatest prison break in history. And the escape is aided and abetted by our government and various special interest groups and organizations. It completely and totally dwarfs all feeble attempts made by prisoners in the past. And even the prisoners who escaped and got away, they usually got caught after, or they spent their lives looking over their whole shoulder and then still getting caught. But imagine if a movement was started on the outside to break people out of prison, and not just to break them out, but to keep them from going back when they should be going back. And to keep people who should be in prison from even going there in the first place. And in addition to this being a prison break, this is the biggest assault on law and order in this country's history. Do I believe in actual criminal justice reform? Of course I do. Giving people a second chance of rehabilitating them is the right thing to do. It is a Christian thing to do. But that is not what the left wants. They say they want to give people a second chance, set them up to succeed, but this is merely the pretense. And it's a good one because it's seemingly noble. Out of all the leftist schemes, this one might have the largest nugget of truth in it because people are worthy of redemption and they can change their lives for the better. But the thing is, they have to want to do that. And just like with all the other schemes of the left, their enormous lie always contains a nugget of truth. That's how they fool so many people. The criminal justice reform scam is actually brilliant, I must say. But we have to remember who these people are. These people are not like you and me. They may look like us, but inside they're demonic. Their hearts are corrupted. They are waging a war against everything we hold dear. God, our nation is founded, our freedom, and our values. They seek to undermine all of that so they can establish an oppressive communist dictatorship in which God is outlawed, Christians are persecuted, and freedom of speech is prohibited. All freedom, for that matter, will be gone. The progressive ideology will reign supreme. This is a society where they, the elite leftists, have total power, and they have possession of all the wealth. Such is the case in any collective oligarchy. But how do these people achieve their goals? They go about it in many ways. They follow Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. They undermine the foundations of our constitutional republic by social engineering. And by the way, in the book, Alinsky actually gives credit to Lucifer. He said he was the first radical known to man who rebelled against the established order and won his own kingdom. And he would be right. Satan did gain his own kingdom, but the caveat is that, that's not a kingdom you want to be a part of. One of the ways in which these radicals undermine this country's foundations is destroying the rule of law. You see, what so many people fail to understand is who these people are. They are evil. They are power-hungry communists. They lie when they say they want a socialist system like those Nordic countries. They are lying. Those countries aren't even socialist. They are all free market capitalist countries. But they just tax the heck out of their citizens in exchange for generous government entitlement programs. These people like de Blasio and Bernie Sanders have a history of praising communist dictators who tortured and killed countless people. I mean, they were praising him even when these countries were committing these acts. They even honeymooned there. Bernie Sanders had his honeymoon in the Soviet Union at the height of them committing crimes against people, such as incarcerating them, in the gulags. And the New York Times and all these other leftist publications have done the same. This isn't new either. New York Times has been doing this back to the 40s, and so has President FDR. He praised Mussolini, and the progressives at the time looked at Italian fascism as the model for America. And if people don't think that the same evil can come to the U.S., they've been fooled. And I blame this nation's failed education system, the media, and Hollywood for that. For years, I've been telling my friends and family that the police departments are one of the last bastions of righteousness in this country. Think about it. Pretty much every organization and agency has been corrupt, including the church, our elected officials, the vast state bureaucracies, and the federal bureaucracies, aka the deep state. Look at the State Department of Corrections and parole boards across the country. They got taken over so easily because of the social work aspect. They hired all these academics, aka radical leftists, who infiltrated the institutions, and people with social work backgrounds. Again, bleeding heart radical leftists. And they transformed these law enforcement institutions into primarily social work agencies with a very soft approach toward crime that prioritize the needs of offenders over victims. Look at the prosecutor agencies across the country being taken over by these Soros-funded prosecutors who are not charging or undercharging violent offenders or offering sweetheart plea deals. Meanwhile, they go after law-abiding citizens for defending themselves and their property. Case in point, the McCloskeys, what's going on in Missouri. But the police departments were not able to be taken over like that because they promoted people from within, and the police, for the most part, are solid, decent, salt-of-the-earth people who only want to do the right thing. Most of them are morally upright and incorruptible. And so I always thought it would be extremely difficult for evil people to come to power, since our police were mainly made up of upstanding, patriotic, solid men and women who love God and their country. But see, that's where Black Lives Matter comes in. Notice that, and you can apply this to anything, notice that whenever the left cannot take control of an institution, they destroy it. That's the only option. And what you are seeing is the destruction of police in this country. Beyond that, the left has been pushing to change the system in other ways. Back in 2018, Columbia University and several other leftist institutions, academic, media, Hollywood, pop culture, were writing all these articles and saying that now there are too many people under parole and probation supervision in this country. They declare that supervision is the new mass incarceration. Before that, they had a problem with there being too many people in prison. So the system said, yeah, okay, we'll put more people on probation and parole. But here's the thing with the left. They are never happy with what you give them, and that's true for any issue. If you concede to anything or grant them anything, they will always want to push it further. So in 2018, they make a big deal about all these people on probation and parole. If you remember, Meek Mill was the biggest poster boy for this movement. And they wanted these people off supervision. Back in 2018, I said, what's next? First, there's too many people in prison. Now there's too many people on probation and parole. What's next? Don't arrest them for committing crimes? And that's exactly what it is. They want pure anarchy, and that's why this war has been waged against the police, to stop them from making arrests. Why parole and probation have been transformed, and why probation and parole officers have been largely handcuffed. They used to be half social worker and half cop. Ever since the left largely took over probation and parole agencies, these agents have become 95% social worker and 5% cop. Which is why they're letting inmates run wild in the institutions and prevent the correctional officers from keeping order. That is why they've largely done away with administrative segregation, which some people know as solitary confinement. And now there's anarchy in the prisons because that was the biggest tool that correctional officers had to keep order. They would take people who were assaulting other inmates or officers and put them away from everyone else. And they've largely limited that in a lot of places in this country. They used to be able to put people in administrative segregation for years, a month. Now in a lot of jurisdictions, they can only do it for 15 days. And in some jurisdictions, you can't even do it if someone is under 18 or under 21, or if they belong to a vulnerable population. And that's kind of ambiguous because if you're a member of the LGBT, you're considered a part of the vulnerable population. So you can pretty much do whatever you want in prison. Now, this is all a part of the cultural Marxist leftist agenda. The leftists need chaos. They need anarchy, and they need all these institutions to collapse so that people will beg the government to just completely take over and fix everything. And right on cue, the Antichrist will come on the scene. He will say that he can cure all of society's ills, including the lawlessness. He will say things like, look at all this crime and lawlessness that we have. Do you remember what it was like when we had law and order, when we could feel safe walking down the streets in our cities? Remember when people used to respect the police? Media will broadcast this message like crazy and echo the sentiment of the Antichrist. They'll rile people up about law and order. And they won't have to work too hard. By that time, people will be so worn out from the lawlessness, they will be so afraid, and they'll be begging for the government to come in and protect them from the criminals. Then, the Antichrist will empower the police. However, these police are not going to be the solid salt of the earth patriots who largely comprise our departments currently. These ranks will be filled by the woke leftist mob, evil people who want to control and hurt others. They will crack down on Christianity, exercise of religious liberty, free speech, free assembly, and anything that goes against the satanic progressive agenda. They will likely still make arrests for actual criminal behavior, but only enemies of the state. Anyone who's politically connected will be able to do whatever they want, just like in any corrupt communist country. If you ever saw V for Vendetta, think of the Fingermen. That's how the police in the New World Order would be. Think of the cops from 1984. That's how they'll be in the future. Now, I don't want you guys to think that this upcoming election is simply an election between Biden and Trump. This really is an election between Western civilization as it currently stands, law and order, and life as we know it, or anarchy, mob rule, and the collapse of Western civilization and the institution of socialism. If you want this lawlessness and violence to go nationwide into the suburbs and rural areas, then vote for Biden. Everyone knows he isn't all there anyway, and he won't really be running the show. He's already caved to the leftist mob, and he's being controlled by them. So, it's people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, they're all going to be running the show. Right now, Trump is the only one holding back the rising tide of socialism, lawlessness, and mob rule. If you value the police, public safety, and the rule of law, the choice who you should vote for in November should be clear. The stakes have never been higher. The elections of 2016 and 2018 were important, but so is this one. This election is one of the most consequential elections in our country's history. So just remember that when you go to vote in November. Thanks for watching. Feel free to share. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. God bless.